Hello, I'm Darren McGee, and today's question asks if I would discuss petulant borderline personality disorder, sometimes referred to as angry borderline. Now, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please click like and please consider subscribing to my channel. But just as a reminder, this video is not a substitute for support from a mental health professional, nor is it a tool to be used to diagnose someone. Now, borderline personality disorder is a condition that's often characterized by fluctuations in moods and behaviors. It's part of the cluster B group of personalities, characterized by erratic and unpredictable behavior. People with borderline personality disorder tend to be very sensitive, and the smallest thing can bring about an intense emotional reaction, which can be problematic not just to themselves but for the people around them as well. Now, I've made a video on borderline personality disorder if you want to check that out. But like a lot of personality disorders, once something has a label, once something has a name, once someone has a diagnosis, yes, it can be helpful. It can be helpful in the sense that person knows what they're dealing with. That person may have an understanding of why they react, why they behave the way they do, and they can address those things. They can seek help for those areas. On the other hand, though, once we give something a name, once we give it a label, we tend to assume that everybody's the same. Everybody with that diagnosis is all going to be the same, when the truth is, it's like a continuum. I often think of it as a spectrum, many different colors, many different shades, many different characteristics. And currently, there are four recognized kinds of borderline personality disorder. There is destructive borderline, there is impulsive borderline, there is quiet borderline, and the topic for today's video, there is petulant borderline. So typically, someone with borderline personality may feel a fluctuating sense of themselves, who they are, what they are, their self-image, their worldview, their concept of themselves and the world around them, their likes, dislikes, their goals, may change so often that life can seem very confusing and very uncertain for them. There is a difficulty in regulating feelings, and as a result of that, relationships are often unstable. And the stereotypical image of someone with borderline personality would be someone who's overly dramatic behaviors, emotional outbursts. There's an intense fear of abandonment. There's mood swings, extreme anxiety, and impulsiveness. And like with all shades of borderline personality, those with petulant borderline tend to find it difficult to regulate how they feel. There is a lack of self-worth and an inability to be able to self-soothe, to self-nurture. So everything gets processed in a certain way. It tends to come out as anger or resentment. And people with petulant borderline, they're often unpredictable. Now, again, I think that may well be due to their difficulty in processing thoughts and feelings. They're often difficult to reassure or to please. They become impatient, frustrated, irritable very easily. They can be prone to angry outbursts to those, especially those who are close to them, and very quickly become disillusioned or disappointed if something doesn't go their way or if they don't get what they want. They often hear no as a personal rejection, a rejection of them as a person, as opposed to perhaps someone isn't able to do or give them something that they want. And they can be very stubborn, they can be very defensive, willful, they can be defiant. At times they're unable to apologize or even admit whenever they're wrong. People with petulant borderline can feel a lot of dissatisfaction in themselves, in their relationships, even in their careers. They also tend to be quite pessimistic, overly critical, restless and anxious and fearful. Now, this can often manifest itself as sometimes not just being overprotective, but sometimes being possessive, but almost always being irritable and judgmental. Now, in relationships, yes, they can be very loving, but due to a belief they have that they themselves are unlovable or undeserving, they tend to act in ways. Now, if they're not being openly aggressive, they can be passive aggressive, they can be defiant. They lash out aggressively at their partners and others if they displease them in any way at all. Their behavior tends to drive other people away. This behavior drives other people away, and when that happens, it reinforces that belief that they are unlovable, they are undeserving. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But they can also be manipulative and controlling of others, sometimes wanting other people to feel guilty for their actions or even guilty for their inactions. There is a kind of a push me, pull me approach to relationships. Now, on one hand, there's constantly seeking reassurance and validation, but at the same time always distrusting others, not fully believing them. And there can be a lot of them posing ultimatums. There can be self-harming or suicidal behaviors, though sometimes these behaviors can, not all the time, certainly not all the time, but sometimes these behaviors can be a way of manipulating and controlling others. Now that distrust I mentioned, that distrust of others can lead to a social anxiety, because people with petulant borderline often feel as if they're continually being judged, that people are generally dishonest, and that difficulty in processing feelings as well as the inability to express them often leads to angry outbursts. It leads to a lot of accusations towards other people. More often than not, they're misdirected towards those who are closest to them. And this can lead to very destructive relationships, not just romantic relationships, friendships, business partnerships, and so on. There's a lot of suspicion and paranoia in relationships. Now, with a partner, they can be very jealous, constantly assuming that their partner is cheating. With friends, there'd be a lot of assumptions that their friend may like someone else more than they like them. And sometimes this can lead them to just shut people out totally. Now, like with all kinds of borderline personality, petulant borderline can be comorbid with other disorders. For example, a depressive disorder, an anxious disorder, eating disorders. There can also be substance misuse and addictions. So in summary, people with petulant borderline personality, they tend to be fearful, anxious, possessive and controlling. They're very jealous as well. Petulant borderline people fear rejection and abandonment, as indeed do all people with borderline personality. They tend to swing between this fear of other people and the need for other people. And that difficulty in being able to regulate, that difficulty in being able to self-soothe, that difficulty in being able to self-nurture often leads to things like addiction and self-harming behaviors. Many who live with petulant borderline they're often very easily insulted, very easily disappointed. But again, that difficulty, that inability to regulate how they feel, to manage expectations, means that everything, almost everything, gets processed and comes out as anger and frustration. Now, mental health professionals like counselors, psychotherapists, and so on, they can help someone with petulant borderline, can help them heal from past traumas, help them to learn how to regulate how they feel, communicate not just with themselves but with others more effectively, and to make more positive life choices. So, there are my thoughts on petulant borderline personality disorder. Now, there are many other characteristics. Please feel free to share them using the comment box below if you want to. I do like reading and responding to your comments when I can, and I've noticed some interesting discussions starting up around these videos. If you like this video, if you find it helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel for future updates on mental health related topics. And until next time, thanks for watching.